Welcome to the Home Group Podcast, where we discuss everything addiction, recovery, mental health. I am Flip.
And I am Luke. Our generation of men, you're not allowed to have feelings.
We're going to talk about things that are uncomfortable, things that are scary, because when you talk about it, you take away its power.
The only thing that's going to keep me clean is me not wanting to be who I was then.
We was in the trenches, now look how we out here ballin'. Popped up in the max, now we floating.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Home Group Podcast. I am Flip. Clean date, April Fool's, 2016. Just me, because Luke's living his best life, maybe, in New Jersey. I don't know if he's coming back. He just sent me a picture in front of Tony Soprano's house. I don't know if he joined the TV mob. I have no idea what's going on, but I just hope he comes back. I can't do this by myself. I need him. So if you see me looking over a lot, nobody's there. It's just me. So, anyway, wanted to do something a little different today. A lot of you have been asking to hear our stories, and we didn't record 2 weeks ago. We recorded last week. I didn't want to skip another week, so I was like, you know what? While you're out of town, I'm just going to go ahead and knock out my story. When he comes back next week, he's going to tell his story. Not sure how that's going to work with both of us, but whatever, we'll figure it out. Anyways, clean day, April Fool's, 2016. I was born October 30th, 1985. My father was in the military, so because of that, we traveled a lot. And my parents had me, I guess, youngish, 20, 21. And so moving around a lot, kind of living that lifestyle of not really being settled in to any place, played a role later on in life that I wouldn't learn until I eventually got clean. My parents did divorce when I was young, and for a majority of my life, I was yearning for that relationship with a father who just really kind of wanted to be a friend. He wanted to be there when times were good. I would see him once every couple years. We'd do a bunch of fun stuff for 3, 4, 5 days, and then he'd send me on my way. I'd hear from him on holidays, and that was about it. Or if I was in trouble, then of course I would hear from him, and I would get an earful. And as a young kid, I think that it's natural for us to kind of put our parents on a pedestal. Now, my stepdad came into my life at a young age. I was 6 years old, maybe 7, when he started dating my mom. By that time, I had already lived in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Colorado, and now came from Colorado and was living in Florida. And my stepdad was a really, really genuine, cool dude. The problem is, in my eyes at that time, is he wasn't my father. He was trying to play this father role, but he just wasn't my dad. And it caused some turmoil kind of growing up. It caused me to act out. I did really well in school. In elementary school, I was in gifted programs. And I befriended somebody who, in 4th grade, I saw he would act out. And when I say act out, I'm talking about over the top. Like, he would throw chairs and, do crazy stuff, right? But what I noticed was he would get a lot of attention because of it. And I, to my core, for as long as I can remember, had self-esteem and self-worth issues. I got picked on a lot as a kid, and getting that attention, whether it was negative or positive, made me feel alive. And it was something that I gravitated towards, right? And so that's when I really started getting into trouble. Fast forward to middle school, and I pretty much, even though I was getting in trouble in elementary school, I got exceptional grades all the way until the last quarter of 6th grade. And that was when things just kind of took a really weird turn for me, right? I went to a rich, preppy middle school, and I was not a rich, preppy kid. You know, I was a middle of the road kid. Like, we didn't have a lot of money. We lived in an apartment. I never needed for anything, but I didn't have a lot of things that other kids, especially at rich preppy schools, had. You know, I didn't have, at that time, it was all the Tommy Hilfiger and Polo and, you know, the newest Jinko jeans and like that whole thing. Like, I just didn't have it. And, of course, you know, kids can be mean, so I got picked on a lot for the things that I wore, or the way that I looked, or whatever it was. And I was just tired of that feeling. I was tired of not being comfortable in my own skin. And that was the first time that I got introduced to drugs, was 7th grade. And I remember sneaking out of my window at the apartment and, you know, hanging out with a couple neighborhood kids, and we would smoke cigarettes, and, you know, obviously that led to, you know, starting to smoke some some pot, right? Like, for a lack of a better term. Normally when you tell your story, you don't talk about specific drugs, but whatever, fuck it. And that was the first time, like, I had got introduced to that, right? And to give you any kind of foreshadowing on how much of a terrible criminal I was, I think I smoked weed for like 2 weeks before I somehow ended up getting arrested for the first time. And it was towards the tail end of 7th grade. They sent 6 cops to my apartment, ran down in the apartment because me and a couple of the neighborhood kids had broke into one of the apartments that they show. You know, they have like one of these apartments that they dress up, you know, to make it look like what it would look like if you lived there. So when somebody comes to potentially rent, they show them that. And we stayed the night in there, and I mean, we didn't, you know, cause any damage. We were just chain smoking cigarettes and smoking pot, and I think we were even drinking some beer or something stupid like that. And the cops, you know, somehow word got out it was me. I was involved. They came to my apartment, and I remember being scared, being genuinely scared, because I had no idea what any of that was about, right? And they said, you know, do you have anything here? And me not knowing any better, I was like, yeah, man, I got some pot. And so I gave them the pot. They took me to jail. And one thing that's kind of cool that they do in Manatee County is they have a thing called teen court. And when you're a teen, they basically, you are in front of a jury of teens who have been through teen court. Your lawyer is a teen who's been through teen court. The defense is a teen that's been through teen court. Everybody in that kind of system, other than the judge, was a teen that had been in trouble and was serving some kind of teen court sentence. And they gave me kind of the max they could across the board, which was house arrest, and I had to write essays, and I had to serve in teen court for X amount of weeks, and doing all of that. And I remember, while obviously not wanting to be in trouble, being the kid at school that like got arrested and got in trouble definitely kind of gave me that bad guy stigma, right? And it was garnering attention from my peers, which is all that I ever wanted. And so that path kind of continued throughout middle school. And I was constantly in trouble. I was constantly in the principal's office. It got to the point where my mom told the principal, like, listen, like, I can't come down to the school anymore. I'm going to lose my job. So whatever he did, whatever he needs to do to fix it, he'll fix it. But, like, just please don't kick my son out. Like, we can't do this. And like that was just kind of a regular thing. If a teacher said something I didn't like, my go-to was to act a fool, act out, because I would get all the oohs and ahs from my peers, and then I'd spend the rest of the day in the principal's office. Now, where I lived and where I was districted, even though I went to the rich, preppy middle school, I ended up going to high school in the hood. Like the hood. And so keep in mind, I've lived up north, I've lived out west. Obviously, I lived in Florida. When I'm in Florida, I've lived the preppy white kid, life. Now I'm in the hood. And kind of moving around so much and having to fit in with your peers, whether it's, listen, I was a cowboy out in Colorado. I used to ride horses and herd cows and herd sheep and, do all of that. So I've lived every kind of lifestyle that I possibly could, so I could fit in kind of with any group. And going to high school in the hood was no different. It was just something that I had to learn and adapt and adjust. The problem with that is now I'm going into my teenage years and my later teenage years, and I still have no idea who I am or who I want to be because I've been so many different people. And being in high school, it was the same thing, except there was a lot more skipping school. There was a lot more drug use. That's where I got introduced to my drug of choice, which was painkillers. And, drinking heavily and crazy parties. And, just a lifestyle of just debauchery at its best, you know what I mean? Like just wild parties, and it was how wasted could you get? That was what was cool. Like how much can you drink? How much can you smoke? How many drugs can you take? That was what mattered to me and my group of friends. And I completely lost myself for the first time in my life. I spent the whole time trying to figure out who I was. And now I'm at a point where I've completely lost myself. I played sports. I excelled in sports, even with all the drug use and crazy stuff. And I ended up getting kicked out of high school halfway through my senior year. Christmas break is supposed to be 2 weeks long. Mine was 2 months. I had a full-time job that I was working, and I just didn't want to go to school. So I tried to go back to school in like February or something like that, and they were like, you're not even enrolled here anymore. And I played the victim role. Like, I can't believe they did this to me. I can't believe this happened to me. How could this happen to me, right? And it caused a lot of strife with my mom and my stepdad. I was living with them. There was fights, there was, just all kinds of crazy stuff, right? In my full-time job, I was working in a restaurant. I was working at Outback Steakhouse, as a matter of fact. And anybody that has worked in the restaurant business knows what that lifestyle is like. That is a lifestyle of work hard, play harder, make money, spend money. And it's kind of, some people turn it into a career, and props to you, but for a lot of people, it's a pit stop. It's just a place that you kind of lose yourself for a couple years, and then you move on to something else. And even though I was young, I excelled, and that's kind of like my MO. No matter what I did in life, I always excelled, and I always exceeded expectations, and I always got opportunities. And I got an opportunity to be a traveling trainer, and I used to go do events. And, I remember Hurricane Charlie came down and really messed up Cape Coral and stuff like that. And for some reason, the only building in the entire town that had electricity was Outback. So they were expecting like a couple thousand people to go there and eat that day. And like when things like that happened, they would send me. Even though my life was already unmanageable. at 18 years old. My life was already unmanageable. At this point, I got kicked out of my house. I was couch surfing, on friends' couches, until eventually I somehow got my own apartment and moved into my apartment, which I was in for 3 months before I got kicked out. Because, fun fact, you have to pay rent. I don't know if you know that, but when you have an apartment, you have to pay to live there. Apparently, it's something that I had forgotten. And it was probably just because all of my money was going to partying, right? At that particular restaurant, they call him proprietor, or the manager, the guy who ran that particular thing, kind of took me under his wing. He was kind of a mentor to me, and he was the first person that, outside of my family, that I felt like treated me like an actual person with potential. He didn't look at me like some fuck up. He didn't look at me like some crazy party animal. He saw potential, and he wanted to foster kind of my growth, right? And he was the one that gave me the opportunity to travel and stuff like that. And right as I'm kind of getting my bearings and starting to really take things seriously, even though my drug use is starting to get out of control, but my work ethic was there, they fired him. And in the corporate restaurant world, that's not like a surprise. I mean, that happens all the time. And that was devastating to me. That was something that, I just couldn't be okay with, right? For some reason, I've always been this kid that, I stand up for what I believe in, no matter what the outcome is to me, right? This was my job, this was my career, this was my only source of income. But they fired him, and I felt like it was unjust. And so I waited to the middle of a busy Friday night. We were on a 2-hour wait, and I left. I quit. And again, found myself just incredibly lost. Really dove headfirst into doing drugs all day, every day. Had a couple different jobs at, little hole-in-the-wall places. And eventually, started stealing from my friends. Started lying to everybody. And it just got to a point where my life was completely unmanageable. And I called my biological father, who had lived in Lakeland, and I said, listen, I need to come live with you. I need to get my life back on track. And it was the first time that I had lived with him since I was 2 years old. And I moved up there, and I started working at Bonefish. And me and his relationship, it just wasn't good. He had a new wife at the time who was just a little bit older than me. And he was kind of doing his thing, right? Remember, he wanted to be my friend. He didn't want to really be a father. And we had gotten into a physical altercation, and he kicked me out. And I'm working at Bonefish at the time. I become a traveling trainer with them. I move in with a girl who was a good girl, and had never done drugs, never really knew anybody that did drugs, and I completely put her through the ringer. And I remember the assistant kitchen manager position was opened at my particular store that I worked at, and they gave it to another person instead of me. Of course, victim mentality, woe is me. This is why is the world against me? And he said, I'll tell you what, I know you didn't get that position, but there's a restaurant that's opening up in New Jersey. I'd like you to go there for a month and, get them on their feet. And so I said, okay. And I went up there. And I went up there with a large amount of pills to hold me over for the month. And my girl at the time, as soon as I got up there, she broke up with me. Rightfully so. Very warranted. And that was, again, my victim mentality, my excuse to do a month's worth of drugs in the span of a couple days, right? And I found myself in a real bad position because I'm to the point now where if I don't do it, I'm getting dope sick. And obviously, if you've ever worked in the restaurant business, there's somebody there that knows where to get drugs, right? And so I was talking to one of my cooks, and I said, "Yo, like I need to get some pills," and he said, "I got you after work." And I take him to the hood. He introduces me to some people. This crazy lady hops in the back of my car. We drive in the middle of the hood. Dude hops in the back of the car. They do the exchange. He gets out, and that she hands me what I thought I was buying, and it ended up being heroin. And at that point, all bets were off, and so I did it, and absolutely fell in love with it. And up until that point, I had done painkillers from about the time I was 15, I think is when I started. And now I'm, 20 years old. And even though my life was unmanageable, like I hadn't really caught any charges, like I hadn't completely ruined my life. From the time I got that first baggie in my hand, within 3 months, my entire life was in shambles. I had lost the Bonefish job because I was stealing money from them, but they couldn't prove it. I had gotten a job at Carrabba's, lost that job, and up in Jersey now. I never went home. And ended up committing a burglary on a dude I was getting high with, his house. We had kind of set it up behind the scenes because he was renting a room from somebody. And he knew everybody was going to be at work. And so when everybody was at work, I took a bunch of shit from this house, right? And I called him from a payphone outside of a McDonald's. And he's like, all right, he's like, I'm going to come pick you up when I get off. And we were going to go to Newark, New Jersey and get a bunch of heroin. And he gets off at 5. 5 o'clock rolls around. 6 o'clock rolls around. 7 o'clock rolls around. I'm calling him. He's not answering. So I was like, you know what? I start getting paranoid. I shoot downtown to the bus station. And at this point, I am 110 pounds soaking wet. I look like a freaking skeleton. And I am completely defeated, right? But I am a man on a mission. And I go, and I'm just about to hop on the bus station. I said, let me call him one more time. And I call him, he said, yo, the police were here. It was crazy. They just let me go. Where you at? I'm going to come scoop you. And so I told him, and I proceeded to hide in a bush until he showed up with all of these things. I had bags and bags of stuff. And he gets me, and we go, and we do our thing, and I get a bunch of drugs. He's like, I got somewhere we can crash, and we were going to come down to Florida. That was our plan. Because, again, Jersey wasn't the problem. Sarasota wasn't the problem. That's why I moved to Lakeland. Lakeland was the problem. That's why I moved to Jersey. Now Jersey was a problem, so I moved back to Florida. I have no idea that the drugs and alcohol is not the problem. I'm the problem. I hadn't come to terms with that yet. And we go to this dude's house, and we're partying. We're doing a bunch of drugs. And the kid that picked me up, he said, I got to go get my phone charger. I said, okay. And we go to get, I was like, I'll walk out to the car with you. I'm going to smoke a cigarette. And we walk out to the car, and I've never seen so many cops come from every direction. I mean, completely circle, headlights everywhere. And I have all the drugs on me, right? And they separate us, and they're talking to us, and I had the drugs in a pack of Newport cigarettes, right? And while the cops have me handcuffed on sitting down on the sidewalk, I somehow shimmy the cigarette pack out of my pocket, and I put it in my waistband. And they take us down to the station. When they pat me down, they didn't feel it. We get down to the police station, and I'm like, hey, can I go to the bathroom? And they were like, yeah. And I was planning on flushing the drugs, but there was a cop standing right behind me the whole time. And so I'm just kind of stuck at this point. They kept me down there for hours. I end up falling asleep on this table. And they go to wake me up, to stand me up, to take me to county. And when they stand me up, the cigarette pack falls. And they find all the drugs. They say, we know some of this is your partner's. Now, I knew he had already been on probation. And so I was like, no, he doesn't even know I have this. You know how being a drug addict is. We don't like to share stuff. Well, come to find out, he was a confidential informant. And he was the reason that we were arrested anyway. And I go to jail, and I'll never forget, I called my mom. And I said, I'm in jail. And she said, oh, thank God. And I could hear the relief in her voice. And I said, no, I don't think you understand. Like, I'm in jail. And she goes, yeah. She goes, at least I know you're not going to die. At least I know you're in a safe place. And I had to detox cold turkey in jail. And jail up in Jersey is completely different than it is down in Florida. There's 150 guys. It's all open base, so there's no cells. And it's like a different world in there, right? I'm learning new things. I'm learning how the jail system works. I'm learning how to move. Luckily, being able to adapt, which I had done all my entire life, made it easy to kind of navigate in jail. And I'll never forget when I received my first offer. My first offer was 8 years in prison. And I was 21, 22 at the time. And I just remember looking at the 8 years and like, golly, like I'm not going to get out until I'm 30. Like I have completely messed up my life. And even though I had completely messed up my life, that first 6 months I was locked up, there wasn't an hour that went by that I didn't think about getting high or wanting to get high. And where I was at, they would bring an NA meeting in once every 2 weeks. And so every 2 weeks, I would go to this NA meeting, and out of 150 guys, it would be me and one or two other people. And one of the dudes in there was a younger dude like me, and we had kind of formed a friendship, and we're kind of on the same page, like, yo, we had so much potential out there, and we're just throwing it away. Like, let's try to figure out how to not be fuck-ups, right? And he got out a little before me. Finally, after 11 and a half months being locked up, they let me out with time served and then put me on 3 years of probation. And I had went to court that day. They gave me time served, and I had come back, and they never called my name to pack up, right? Now, I had no family in Jersey at that time. And I just figured I had, like, a hold from another county up there because I was kind of committing all sorts of crimes all over the place. And the next morning, they called the pod, and they said, tell Flip to pack it up. So I pack it up. I pack my stuff up. They released me. When I got arrested, there was a heat wave, so I was wearing sandals, cargo shorts, and a thin button-up t-shirt, or button-up short-sleeve shirt. When I got released, there was snow on the ground. And I was walking from the jail, which Middlesex County Jail is in the middle of nowhere, in the snow, in sandals, in shorts that were too tight because, remember, I got arrested at 110 pounds. I was 180 pounds now. The sleeves were up to here, and I was just so freaking happy. And I'm walking. I don't even know where I'm walking, but I'm just walking with my stuff. And a truck pulls over. He said, hey, man, you just got out of the county? I said, yeah. He said, where you got to go? I said, I got to go downtown, check into probation. He said, come on, hop in, I'll give you a ride. So I was like, all right, cool. So I hop in this truck. It was a dude who had been to prison and kind of gotten his life back together and kind of was giving me some hope, telling me it was possible. And he drops me off at probation. And they said, we don't have you in our system. And I said, okay, listen, I just went to court yesterday. They told me I was on probation. Like, how many people voluntarily want to be on probation, right? And they're like, listen, we can't put you on probation. The court has to put you on probation. You're not in our system. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. And this is why I tell people in my journey, just as much as the higher power works in your life, believe that lower power is working twice as hard to take you down, right? And I had a whole list of phone numbers. Some not good phone numbers, right? Um, and I had probably $20 to my name. And I tried to call my mom. I can't get through. I tried to call my biological father because he was supposed to line up a place for me to stay when I got out. Couldn't get him on the phone. I called my aunt who lived in upstate New York, and she was like, oh my God. She's like, I'm coming to get you, but I'm not going to be there for 6 hours. And I said, okay. And I'm looking through this phone list of numbers. A lot of them just, drug dealers, connects, shit like that. And I found that one kid's phone number that I went to NA meetings with. And I called him, and he said, where you at? I said, I'm at the train station. He said, dude, I live 2 blocks from the train station. I'm coming to get you. And I was like, sweet. And so I'm just sitting there on the bench, and he comes walking up. And I had never been so happy. He looked healthy. He looked like he was doing good. And I just embraced him with a hug. And we're walking from the train station. And he said, he said, I'm so glad you got out. He said, I got something for you. I said, yeah. He said, open your hand. And he put 2 bags of heroin in my hand. And the pit in my stomach was instantaneous. And as soon as we got back to his house, I didn't even hesitate. I went right in the bathroom and I did a bag, right? And if anything, for those of you that aren't addicts, can let you in to the brain of an addict, all of that I went through, 11 and a half months, looking at 8 years, still had 3 years probation, had $20 to my name, that's it, in a state that I didn't have anywhere to go, anybody, and I didn't even hesitate. And it sucks because my aunt and uncle drove down with my 2 cousins who, at the time, I think were 2 and 6, maybe 3 and 6. And I was so high, I was like out of my mind. And I'm like sleeping on the window, and they're like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I must have ate something bad. Like I'm just not feeling good. And I obsessed about using. And I'm living with my aunt. I call probation. Eventually, they're like, yeah, you're in our system. Probation officer's pissed I'm in upstate New York because technically I've crossed state lines. But he's like, I'll let you slide if you come here every 2 weeks. So for every 2 weeks, my aunt had to drive me down 6 hours one way to check into probation. And when I got there, I was trying to get my probation transferred back down to Florida, down to Northport where my parents lived. And every time I would go to probation, I would call that same dude that I was going to NA meetings with and see if he could score me some drugs. And he never did, right? Because he got worse and worse and worse and ended up getting locked back up. And they finally transferred my probation after 6 months of doing that. And I go down to Northport, back up. That whole time, the only thing my aunt would let me do is go to NA meetings. She would let me go to one NA meeting a day. And so that's where I got introduced to NA meetings. And I remember the first couple meetings going in there and sitting, and I'm like, I'm nothing like these fucking people. I am nothing like them. And after probably a couple weeks, I started to share, and it got to the point where when I went to leave, I'll never forget my last share. I said, I'm scared. I'm scared to go back down to Florida. Like, I've kind of built a foundation here, and I'm going into unknown territory, and I don't feel good about it. And then luckily they gave me a list of numbers and stuff like that, and I came down. And it was the first time that my parents could see that, like, something had changed in me, right? That I genuinely wanted to kind of do better. And I went to 2 NA meetings when I got back to Florida, and it just wasn't for me. It was a completely different vibe. Again, I'm not like these people. These people are weird. And I got a job at a restaurant again and started working. And that's kind of my MO. I'll just become a workaholic and work hard, play hard, because that way I don't have to focus on myself. And I had also told myself the lie that weed wasn't the problem. And so I started smoking weed again, even though I'm on probation. I'm going to probation every month. Every month for because I had done 6 months in Jersey. For 2 years when I was in Florida, they never drug tested me once. Towards probably the last 6 months of that 2 years, I got back into pills. And I got back into pills bad. And I committed another burglary. And I got arrested in Manatee County. And I'm like, okay, well, they're going to send me back to Jersey now. And I went to first appearance and they ROR'd me. Which is, they released me, right? And I thought that there was a mess up in the system. And I got out, and my mom had kind of put her foot down. She's like, you ain't coming here, like, you better figure it out. And I was like, I need help. Like, I got to go to rehab. And that was the first time I had went to rehab. And my probation officer was pissed, but because the charge was still pending, they didn't violate me. They wanted to see how it played out. And so what they did was they slapped a court order on that rehab. And that rehab I was in for a little over 6 months. I broke every rule there was. I was trying to get girls, like I had like a girlfriend in rehab, which anybody that's been to rehab will tell you that's a brilliant idea. And somehow I commenced, and the girl that I had met that was my girlfriend, ironically, weird enough, was roommates with my now wife at the time. And I called her. I said, hey, great news. Just commenced the program. I'm coming over. She said, all right, stop by the liquor store and pick up a bottle of wine so we can celebrate. And I didn't even hesitate, right? Again, the mind of an addict. Like, I did not play the tape through. Everything that I had learned over that 6.5 months went right out the window. And from that bottle of wine, within 2 months, I was back in jail. We had gotten into a fight with my wife and her boyfriend at that time. We had gotten kicked out of the apartment. We were living out of a hotel. Anybody that's in this area knows about the Cadillac Inn, which is an absolute shithole. It's one of those hotels you can rent by the hour. I was bartending downtown, and just my drug use was completely out of control. Her drug use was completely out of control. And I ended up robbing that bar that I worked at. And the cops came, they arrested me, blase, blase. So I still have, that charge I'm fighting in Manatee County. Now I have a charge in Sarasota County. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm definitely going to prison. Like, this is it, right? And I remember being in jail, and suddenly everything had started to click. The things that I had learned in rehab started to click. The little sayings, the little nuances. I just kind of started seeing everything for what it was. And I did 6 months in Sarasota. They transferred me to Manatee County. I did another 6 months there. And it was getting time for me to get released. And my mom said, listen, like, you're not coming home. These are your options. You can go to a halfway house. I will pay for 2 months at a halfway house. Or you can figure it out on your own. And I was like, all right, looks like I'm going to a halfway house. And when I got to the halfway house, as we had pulled up, one of the dudes that I was locked up with in Sarasota was walking out of the halfway house, right? That's one of those higher power things. And he said, oh my God. He said, are you here? I said, yeah. He said, perfect. He said, put your stuff down. We're going to a meeting. And I just became immersed in the recovery community in Sarasota. And I met a bunch of people that were around my age that we were just all trying to figure this thing we call life out, right? And I got a sponsor for the first time, and I had started working steps, and My sponsor told me don't get into a relationship for the first year, and I was like, all right, cool. Does that mean I can't sleep with chicks, right? And he was like, I mean, I don't recommend it, but like if that's what you want to do, like, but just no relationships. And so like I became a bit of a whore, right? And still, even though I was doing some of the work, I still had a long road ahead of me. I had gotten a home group, I had gotten a service commitment, and I had gotten just so plugged in into this community. And then I got sick. And I was clean, you know. I did my 6 months in a halfway house. I moved in with a friend in recovery. I started at like 2 years, started dating a normal chick. And at about 3 years clean, once I started dating that normal chick, my meeting attendance slipped off. I stopped kind of hitting my knees in the morning. I stopped making my bed. I stopped doing all the little things that had kept me clean for so long. And I had gotten sick. And, you know, I go to the hospital. The doctor tells me, you need to get your affairs in order because you're not going to leave this hospital. And I was just so blown away, right? Because I'm like, I know damn well I had not gone through everything that I had been through in my life to be sober and somehow be losing my life. My liver, kidneys, gallbladder, pancreas, everything was shutting down. And my eyes turned yellow, my skin turned yellow. I was itchy from head to toe to the point where I had friction burns on my fingers. I started hallucinating because I couldn't sleep. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I'm in and out of the hospital. They finally do a liver biopsy. And they sent it to... The liver biopsy came back clean, and my GI doctor about lost his mind. He was the most polite little Indian dude. I had never even heard him like raise his voice to anybody, and that little Indian dude was cussing out the entire hospital staff because he was so furious that they were saying that my liver, you know, thing was clean because I was yellow, which is like textbook, like your liver shutting down. And so he took it upon himself to form a group of doctors in Sarasota to kind of take my case on to try to figure out what the fuck was going on with me. Meanwhile, I still have all these symptoms. It was the first time in my life. I never felt this way in recovery. You'll hear some people tell their stories and they say they just wanted to die. I never wanted to die because then that meant I couldn't get high anymore if I died. This was the first time in my life that I had hit my knees and I had prayed to God to take my life because that's how miserable and how much pain I was in. So while all this is going on, I am literally doing anything that anybody tells me to try to ease some of my symptoms. I had done yoga. I went to a Chinese medicine doctor who he most certainly did the most for me and kept me sane enough and kept me to continue to fight. And I'm super, super grateful for him. And his name's Dr. House. It doesn't get much cooler than that. And finally, they send my liver biopsy to the Mayo Clinic, and they find out that I have Wilson's disease, right? Which, all that means is my body produces too much copper. Yes, that also means I'm basically a superhero. But because my body produces too much copper, and because I was really into fitness and I was taking supplements, it had overwhelmed my liver, and it just kind of set off this chain reaction because my body couldn't filter out the copper, right? And they figure it out. They get me on medicine. I'm good as new in 48 hours. I'm back to my old self, and I just remember like the amount of gratitude that I had, right, for everything, for everybody that had, you know, worked for the doctors. Just I had a new lease on life. And as you can see through this story, you can see the places where that higher power is kind of sticking his head in, and you know, you'll also see the parts when that lower power comes to play. So I'm back at work for like a week, and a coworker of mine said, listen, I know you've been clean for some time, but my dad passed away, and I have like 300 painkillers, and I have no idea what they are or what they're worth. Do you think you could at least point me in the right direction? And I sat with that for like 3 days. And I had called, actually, Boston Chuck. Shout out Chuck from Boston with Love. If you want to know who that is, he was on our podcast. And he was up in Boston. And I had told him, and he said, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to hang up with me. You need to go to a meeting. You need to raise your hand. You need to tell on yourself. You need to call your support group. You need to tell on yourself. You need to talk about this until this feeling goes away. And I said, yeah, you're right. You're right. And I didn't. And the next day at lunch, I told him, I said, I can get you $300 for all of it. And he said, sweet, I'll go grab it at lunch. And he gave it to me. And I started getting high again, right? Just like that. And that started a 6-month run, right? Of me getting high. Now, meanwhile, because I was dying, the people that care about me were like doing fundraisers and were like, you know, raising money for my medical bills, and like they were just doing all of these tremendous things for me. And I get better and I'm getting high, right? And the supplement store where I had bought my supplements, the dude who owned it felt super bad for me and threw a fundraising event for me, right? And by the time he had got everything coordinated and everything like that, they had figured out the cure and like had gotten me back to normal, but I was getting high. And he threw this fundraiser event with other supplement companies and like, you know, DJs and car washes and rock climbing walls and like all these people coming out and just handing me money. Meanwhile, I'm high as a kite, and the guilt and the shame. And it was something that I didn't even share with anybody until I was probably 4 years clean. I had never told anybody because I had that much guilt and shame over that, right? And my roommate, good friend of mine, Mitch, tells me, he's like, dude, I know you're getting high. We need to get you help. And I said, all right, I'll go to detox. And then I'll go to rehab. He said, all right. So they take me to detox. And somehow I had convinced him to drop off my paycheck at detox because I was going to get supplies for rehab. And he was reluctant, but I am a master manipulator. And so he dropped it off. And I went on a run for another week until the money was gone. And went back to detox. And when I went back to detox, like, it was at that point that the first time in my life, A, I had gone voluntarily. B, I was physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually bankrupt. And I tell people this all the time because, you know, there's a lot of people who have family members or loved ones that are struggling, and they're like, I think he needs a long-term program, or I think she needs this, or I think she needs that. And I said, listen, like, all of that sounds good, but until they are truly ready, there's nothing that any of us can do. It truly comes down to the individual and if they're ready. And at that point in time in my life, like, I was ready. I was 30 years old and was basically starting over again. And so I used that time in rehab as my mental boot camp. I journaled. I did stream of consciousness writing. I spoke in every class. They offered therapy sessions. I took every therapy, every counseling, every group session, every one-on-one that anybody offered. I took advantage of. And I remember this one therapist lady. I was telling her how I have low self-esteem and low self-worth. And we always had devotionals in the cafeteria in the morning, and it's one of the only time that all the guys and girls in the rehab are together because they have to keep them separate because you put guys and girls together in rehab and that's how babies get made, okay? And I remember telling her that when I walk in, I feel like this chick's like, oh, look at this clown. And this dude's like, wow, this dude's fucking weird looking. And like, I think that all these people are like talking shit on me in their minds, right? And she goes, wow, that's so self-centered. And I said, no. Like, I'm not saying that they think like I'm fly or that I'm good looking. Like, I think they're talking bad about me. She goes, why do you think that they're not Why do you think that the girl's not like, oh, I gotta go upstairs and straighten my hair? Or why? How do you know the guy's not like, oh, I really gotta go to the bathroom. I can't wait for this meeting to be over. Like, why do you think that they're thinking about you? And it was a perspective that I had never contemplated before. And so, like, all of those services that they had offered, I took advantage of. There was even a kooky lady who did like this weird exercise when you did one-on-ones with her where she would make you like stand like a tree. Like put your arms all the way out, pretend they're branches of a tree, and pretend your feet are the roots, and like made me like howl like a wolf, like crazy stuff. But that's how desperate I was. And I was willing to do any and everything to figure out my life. Because up until that point, the one thing that I knew is whenever I am in charge of my life, I end up in jail. And I end up completely at rock bottom. And so I was willing to do any and every suggestion that was given to me. And I gained so much clarity through that 3.5 months that I was in rehab. I had built some genuine friendships with guys, and like I had told my guys that, like, listen, when we get out, like, I'm really about this recovery life. If you are too, cool. If not, that's okay too, but I'm gonna have to distance myself because I have to save myself. And we get out, and one of my guys, Todd, I was so close with him, and we would hit meetings, and we would hit the gym, and we would do all of these things. And I noticed that like his meeting attendance started to slip, and like all of a sudden out of nowhere he's like, hey, like I'm working, can I borrow $20? And I'm like, yeah, I got you. And like, in the beginning he would pay me back, and then like all of a sudden it stopped happening. And he had come clean that he had relapsed, and he was going to go to detox and like do that whole thing. And then he got out, and like it was kind of like the same thing over and over again. And to the point where like I had to basically cut off communication from him. And I had got word that he was at a halfway house, actually the halfway house that I was at previously. And I'll never forget it. I was driving down Fruitville and Lockwood Ridge, and I was like, man, I should call Todd. And then I was like, you know what? If he was doing good, he would have reached out to me. And that night he overdosed and died. Right? And it was hard because it was the first time in my life that I had learned about boundaries. I'm a people pleaser. And it was the first time that I had stuck to boundaries, right? And that's my introduction to boundaries. Like, I set this boundary, I stuck to it, and now somebody's not here. And I remember going to that funeral, and I remember hugging his mom and just really second guessing if I was doing the right thing, by distancing myself. And, I had talked to my sponsor, and when I had told my sponsor, he had patted my back, and he said, I don't see a cape back there. You can't save anybody. And I had to keep fighting the good fight, right? The other guy that I had gotten super close with, relapsing. As a matter of fact, the first date that I went on with my wife, we had to leave because I had to take him to rehab, right? And he couldn't get right, and he was in a coma for 2 months, and had to learn how to walk and do all this stuff over again, right? And the sad part is I have buried so many people that I can't even remember all of their names if I had to. Like, if there was money on the line, I couldn't remember everybody that I've buried over this 7 years. And I just continued to fight the good fight, right? Now, what I've learned since being clean and what this journey has looked like since rehab, right? One, I am still a sick human being. I still make mistakes. I am far from perfect. I set boundaries and stick to them. I have open communication. When I started dating my wife, in the beginning, because of those self-esteem and the attention-seeking behavior, I had social media back then. And I was the douchebag at the gym that would like post like shirtless selfies. And if a chick liked my picture, then we go together. Congratulations, we're now boyfriend girlfriend because you like my picture, right? And just that sick, just attention seeking behavior. That was how I felt validated as a man. And it had caused me to cheat on my wife when she was my girlfriend in the beginning, right? And I had gotten caught because I'm a terrible criminal. And I remember she had called me, she had found out, she obviously was upset, and I didn't want to deal with it. And so I cut the phone call short. But there's something that happens when you get clean and when you're trying to like live a better life and be a better human. You have this thing called a conscience. And like I started feeling like a real fucking scumbag. And so I called her and she said, "Why don't you come over and we'll sit down and we'll talk." And it was one of the most genuine conversations that I had had, and it was probably the first like adult conversation that I had had in my life, especially with a woman. We sat down. There was no yelling. There was no name calling. There was no blaming. There was no finger pointing. She expressed that she was hurt, rightfully so, and I expressed that I don't think it's possible for me to be monogamous. I don't think it's possible for me to just be with one person. Like, I have issues, and I don't think that I can be helped as far as this is concerned. And she said one of the most eye-opening things that has ever been said to me. And it was a question, and she said, "Have you even tried?" And we continued to talk for about 45 minutes, and then I had went home. And that question is all I kept hearing. Had I even tried before in my life? Like, had I ever tried to just be a stand-up dude ever in my entire life? And with no promises of getting back into a relationship or anything like that, the next morning I had deleted all social media. And I had reached out to her and I said, "Listen, I know it's going to take some work, but I'm willing to kind of put in the work and I have the willingness to right this wrong." It was the first time that I had got introduced to Jordan, and I had built a bond with him because when we started dating, Jordan was 9, 10 months old. Dad wasn't in the picture. And I did it. You know what I mean? And it was hard. And for about 6 months, there would be random times she would call me and ask me to FaceTime her, and I would FaceTime her. And there was times I would get frustrated, but then I would remember that I'm the one that caused these insecurities. And again, no name calling, no like blaming, no guilt, none of that. It was just kind of genuine work, right? And I put in the necessary work. And we grew, and my relationship with Jordan grew, and our relationship got better exponentially. My stepdad, who for my entire life, I never wanted to give him credit for stepping up because he wasn't my biological father. I rebuilt that relationship, and now he's, one of my best friends. I talk to him every single day. He was the best man in my wedding. It's just so incredible to me, the life that I have today, because of the work that I was willing to put in, right? And the work that I was willing to put in was not forced by anybody. It was not forced by the court system. It was not forced by my parents. It was not forced by a loved one, by friends. It was an inside job, right? And there's still things that I struggle with. I still have insecurities. I still have self-worth issues. I, from time to time, still have communication issues. I have issues with men in my life because I set certain expectations where if I show up and I'm there for you, I kind of expect the same, which, if you go into things with expectations, you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's just kind of what I've learned along the journey. In early recovery, I remember I got this job because I didn't want to go back to the restaurant business, right? I just didn't feel like it was conducive to the lifestyle that I was trying to live. So I got a job remodeling homes, which is hilarious because I don't know the difference between a hammer and a screwdriver. Okay? I'm not handy. Yeah, I could YouTube some stuff, but to do it for a living is just crazy. And this dude takes me to Bird Key, which, if you're in Sarasota, Bird Key is multi-million-dollar homes. And we go into this big empty house, and he drops me off, and he's like, hey, he gave me a list of to-dos, and he's like, I gotta go pick up some supplies, and I'm gonna pick up some food. I said, all right, cool. And I'm out back looking, it's on the water, I'm looking at the water, I'm smoking a cigarette, and I'm just genuinely happy. I'm free. I feel free for the first time in a long time. And I'm listening to Pandora. This is when I was in the halfway house. I'm listening to Pandora, the free version, right? Because I don't got no money. And I'll never forget it. There was a song that came on, and I'm jamming, and the dude that I was working with calls me. And I answer the phone, and he said, hey, I'm at the store grabbing some food. You cool with a sandwich? And as I went to talk, Pandora cut on my phone, even though I was on a phone call, right? Which it never does that. And I look at the song that's playing, I hear it, and then I look at it, and I see the Pandora screen, and it was a song by Drake off his first album called Fireworks. And what that song had meant to me, the song was basically like when he was a kid, he used to have dreams of fireworks, and he never knew what it meant, like what it stood for, until he had finally made it. And now he sees why he had those dreams, right? So it really hit home for me. And I look, and the song's playing, and I say, hey, can you hear the music playing? And he's like, no, dude, I don't hear any music. And I was like, I look at my phone again, and I see it. It says Drake, Fireworks, Pandora, like I see everything. And I'm like, all right, yeah, just pick me up a sandwich. That's cool. And I hang up, and it goes back to the song that was playing before I answered the phone. And, like, that was my higher power's way of kind of telling me, like, I'm on the right path. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And there's a million stories that I have like that, right? My higher power isn't a big booming voice in the sky that says, don't do that, do this. Like, my higher power speaks to me through people, through situations, through circumstances, through things that arise. It never ceases to amaze me that whenever I get in a funk and I have a lack of gratitude, somebody reaches out to me who's got it 100 times worse than I do, and just puts things into perspective to the point where, like, when I hang up that call, I'm like, all right, I get it, dude. Like, I get it. I'm sorry, And that's how I talk to my higher power. There's no proper way to talk to how I talk to my higher power. It is not a formal conversation. I even cuss sometimes when I talk, right? To him. That's just the relationship that I've built. But it's things like that along this journey that have shown me that I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This podcast was a dream of mine since I was 2 years clean, and never really got the courage up to, do it until Luke came along. And it took me pitching Luke probably 2 years before he agreed to do it. And then we started doing it, and, I have my doubts, but then all the love and support and help that you guys tell us that it brings you, these are the things, this is my higher power's way of telling me, like, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? And so, like, my life is beautiful. Like, I'm sitting in a house that we built. My truck is paid off. I'm married. Not only am I a father to Jordan, but I have my daughter Ella. Like, today she had a cheer camp kind of recital where they did some dances, and, like, I got to be present for that. I'm accountable. I'm dependable. I have a boatload of fun. I wear a lot of hats. Tomorrow, I coach basketball in the morning, and then my stepdad's dad was out of town for Father's Day, so I got my stepdad, my mom, his dad, and his wife all coming over, and I'm cooking them dinner. We're doing a Father's Day dinner. These are the types of things that I get to do today because I figured out a way to just not get high for today. That's it. It's I don't try to overcomplicate it, right? I don't worry about tomorrow. I'll deal with tomorrow when tomorrow comes. I don't dwell on yesterday. What's that saying? I hate it, but it's so true. If you stand in yesterday and tomorrow you're pissing on today, right? And so that's kind of how I choose to live my life, is just for today. I fail daily, but the most important thing is, as long as I don't get high today, everything else will work itself out. I take daily inventory of my day. I try to have regular conversations with my higher power. Not so consistent with that. I have been slacking on my gratitude list. It's been really hard to kind of get back in the swing of things. With that, I'll pick it up for a couple of days and get back on it, and then I'll fall off. I think I haven't done it all week, as a matter of fact, which is no surprise, is why I'm trying to run around and punch giraffes in the face, because my gratitude just isn't there. And that's okay. A lot of people ask me about cravings. Do I still get cravings? Very, very rarely. And if it does, it lasts for about 2 seconds. Because one of the tools that I learned was to play the tape through, right? And what does getting high look like for me today? Well, I can't go to work because I work with people in recovery. I can't answer my phone because anybody that calls my phone is going to be in recovery. I can't come home because my wife is in recovery. I don't want to be around my kids if I'm high. So that leaves me in my truck in the Walmart parking lot, and that just sounds miserable. So, looks like I'm not getting high. And it's that simple. And then I pick up the phone and I call somebody in my support group. I have a support group of guys. Another gem, Boston Chuck, told me, I thought you were just supposed to have a sponsor and that was it. He said, no, I have a whole support group of guys. I have a guy that when I feel like fighting somebody, I call. I have a guy that if I feel like, stepping out on my old lady, I call. I have somebody who, if I'm white knuckling and feel like drinking or drugging, that I call. And so, I have a support group of guys in my life that will hear me out, but will call me on my shit. And those are the type of people that I need in my life. And they know, just like they do me, I'll do the same thing. If they call me, I will hear them out, and then I will proceed to tell them they're idiots, right? And so far it's worked. Am I cured? No. I'm not. Luckily, it's 7 o'clock, 7 something, and I haven't gotten high thus far. I don't think I'm going to get high tonight. No plan to. I'll deal with tomorrow when tomorrow comes. The further you get removed from getting high, the simpler it all seems. While it is impressive that people have 10, 15, 20 years clean, and hats off, I salute you. The people that impress me at meetings are the people that get 30 days and 60 days and 90 days. I'm like, holy shit, how did you do that, right? Because I remember just the chaos of your first 30 days, just white knuckling every minute of every day. And I'm just so, here we go, here's my gratitude list. I'm so grateful that I don't have to live like that. I'm so grateful that I'm not white knuckling. I'm grateful that, I have a support group and I have a loving, supporting family that encourages me to live the life that I'm living. I tell everybody, if you don't think this program works, because I never thought it did. I thought everybody that was in recovery was sipping the Kool-Aid and y'all were a bunch of crazy people, right? I tell everybody, give it a year. And if you work an honest program for a year, and work a program, get a sponsor, do steps, get a home group, get a service commitment, do 90 meetings in 90 days. If you do that at the end of the year, if you want to go back out, go for it, knock yourself out. But I promise you, if you do those things at the end of the year, you're not going to want to give that time back. And you're going to see some of the gifts of recovery. The gifts of recovery to me, while yes, I love material things, the gifts of recovery are my relationships, my family back in my life, being there for my kids. I don't miss games. I don't miss, sporting events. I don't miss award ceremonies at school. Like, those are the gifts of recovery that recovery has given me that I can't quantify. There is no amount of money that can give me those feelings, right? And I'm just incredibly grateful. I've dealt with a lot of crazy stuff in recovery. I remember the high school I went to, two of my very close friends that were brothers OD'd a week apart from each other by around Christmas, when I had 2 years clean, and I had to go to their celebration of life, and their mom was an absolute wreck, and when she saw me, she collapsed in my arms and let out the most blood-curdling scream that still haunts me. I've had to bury friends, loved ones, and be there through that. I've lost jobs. I got myself into credit card debt and was lying to everybody about it because I was embarrassed. I've done a lot of crazy, or dealt with a lot of crazy things in recovery. But the most important thing is I just didn't get high, right? And so as long as I don't get high, I can figure everything else out. Ella was born premature. She was in the NICU. And no amount of money could have changed the circumstance. And when I had my relationship with money up until that point was, whoever says money doesn't buy happiness just doesn't have enough. And when I looked at that doctor and said, how much, do we have to Bayflight her somewhere? What kind of specialist do we need to get? How much is it going to cost? Whatever we have to do. And the doctor looked at me and put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, I don't think you understand. It's not about money at this point. It's up to her. And I said, what do you mean it's up to her? She's friggin' 7 months old, 7.5 months old. What do you mean it's up to her? And he's like, it's up to her. Her lungs haven't fully developed. She has to fight to stay alive. And if she does, then we're in the clear. And getting that news and sitting on that chair in that hospital and just feeling so hopeless, right? But even though we made it through that, and she's a happy, healthy 5-year-old who's now a cheerleader, which I'm going to look forward to when she's in high school, right? And that's a whole nother set of problems, but we'll deal with that when that time comes. That changed my perspective on money, right? And that was one of those teaching moments where, no, you need to understand, there's some things money can't solve. And so, for me, it's that's one of the biggest things is remaining teachable, understanding that I don't have it all figured out, being okay with not being okay sometimes. I choose to live in the solution, not in the problem, right? If shit hits the fan, I allow myself 24 hours to feel whatever feelings I want to feel. Good, bad, sad, depressed, angry, whatever it is. I allow myself that time to feel those feelings and ride those waves. And then tomorrow is back to business. If you're going through some things. And that's what me and my support group, we do for each other, If they're going through some things, okay, what do you want to do? You want to cry? I'll cry with you right now. We can cry. But after we cry, we wipe our eyes and it's back to business, right? Let's figure out how to fix whatever circumstances we're in. And so, I'm just eternally grateful for the life that I have today. It is not perfect, but it is worth it. For anybody that's out there that's struggling, I encourage you. I try to respond to every text, every email, every social media message. I'm not good about it, but if you find my social media page, feel free to message me, the home group, Tiff and Flip show, whatever it is, and I try to respond and try to give advice when advice is wanted, and because I know what it's like, but I also know that so many people struggle with that self-worth and that self-esteem and don't think that they're worth having a good life, and I'm here to tell you, you are. I'm just I'm blessed, and I love all of you guys. Thank you so much for sitting with me. I know it's a little bit of a different episode. Thank you for allowing me to share my story. I'm excited for next week for you guys to hear Luke's story, because his story is, mine's a little more Gossip Girl, OC, Gilmore Girls. His is more Peaky Blinders, Sons of Anarchy. So, I love his story. It's so cool seeing him grow and be able to tell his story, because there was a point in time when he couldn't even talk in a room full of, 5 people, and now seeing him just come out here and flourish has been so cool to watch. And we love you guys so much and appreciate the support. Make sure you're following us on everything. Everything's going to be in the description. And we'll see you next time.